Finally, we'll discuss the experimental results and conclude my talk. So, Silicon Photonics has been quite a mature platform now for the last 2 decades, and it started with devices, and now it has have a lot of different applications which are really commercializing, especially transceiver among them being one, which are like standalone devices which are already available, and Intel and Cisco have already launched these devices. And there are different other applications like microwave photonics and quantum photonics sensors. So all these are very promising, and to for realizing all these applications, you need different kinds of functionalities. So like filters, modulators, multiplexers, and mostly for quantum photonics, we need nonlinear signal processing. And to realize these functionalities, we need the basic building blocks, that is the different kind of devices, like starting with waveguides, dbr, then directional couplers, mach senders, and ring resonators. So ring resonator is a very versatile and very attractive device, because using this we can realize all these different kind of functionalities. So we'll just quickly discuss two different kind of functionalities, one in the linear domain and other in the nonlinear domain. So in linear domain, mostly ring resonators can be used as filters or modulators. So this is a paper from Lipson's group, where they have made a ring resonator. So black color is the ring resonator. You launch in light here. Some light gets coupled into the ring, and whichever is phase matched stays inside the ring, and remaining comes out. So if you see what is coming out, the transmission, we can observe a notch or a drop in the lambda, which is actually stored in the ring. Now this can be reconfigured using a PIN diode, or different things, PN diode or thermoptic phase shifter, but here they have used PIN diode for reconfiguring this. So PIN diode, if you see, the cross section looks like this. The optical waveguide remains intrinsic, and P and N regions are doped on either sides of the waveguide. So when you bias it, you can see that because the carriers are injected into this region, into the ring waveguide, the refractive index changes, and hence there is a shift in the resonance. So this can be used as switches or modulators. The other thing, which is the nonlinear domain, there mostly it is used for photons pair sources. So it's mostly for quantum photonics application. So this paper shows that they have launched in very high pulsed laser, which acts as a pump into the ring resonator. And as a result of this four-wave mixing process, which is a nonlinear process, you can see the generation of Idler and signal photons that is happening. So we will, our talk relates to something that is the photon sources that we'll see. Before going into the details, we'll just see the different nonlinear process, that is the four-wave mixing, and how that happens. So the polarization is defined as, can be expressed like this, and in terms of chi, that is the susceptibility, and E is the electric field. And the moment term nonlinear comes into picture, we should keep in mind we launch in very high power. Then only the nonlinearity comes into picture. And whenever we launch in high power, all these higher order terms come into picture. So for silicon, as it's a centrosymmetric crystal, mostly chi2 is 0, and the nonlinearity contribution is mainly from chi3. And any chi3 material, if you take, be it a straight waveguide or a ring waveguide, and if you pump hard using a very high power pump laser, normally what happens is the generation of signal and idler takes place. And this follows these two rules, that is, energy is conserved as well as the momentum is conserved. So if you see the energy conservation, what happens is the two pump photons together gives rise to the signal and the idler. And momentum also has to be conserved. So k is the wave vector, which also takes place. So using this, these are mostly using spontaneous four-wave mixing. People have tried to demonstrate photon sources. So this is a very big circuit, which is mostly aiming at generating the photon sources and distributing it to different chips. So that's why chip-to-chip teleportation they call it. So our interest will be here, but we'll quickly see how the circuit works. So here you launch in the pulse, which is a high power laser, which is shown by the green color. And this Mach Zehnder modulators divides into all these, divides the pulse into these 4-ring resonators. These 4-ring resonators act as photon sources, and they generate the signal and idler as shown by this red and blue color. Now this photon actually gets distributed or routed using this unbalanced Mach Zehnder as well as the waveguide crossings. And finally, they are processed here using these phase tuners. And the quantum mechanical operator is this, which helps them to, divide it into, and then the final measurement is done in this other four Mach Zehnders. So this is I mean, this is a whole lot of, again, a different topic, but we will restrict our interest today in this ring resonators, where we can see also they have shown with the arrows how the signal and Idler are generated in this ring resonators. So before that, we'll just see the basic mechanism. We'll try to understand how it happens. So this is an all-pass micro-ring resonator. And when you launch in power into it, something gets coupled depending on the coupling coefficient of this directional coupler region. And a part of it gets transmitted. So we say this as the through coupling coefficient, and this is the cross coupling coefficient. And A is the loss factor in the ring. So whichever is phase matched gets stored here and doesn't come out in the output in the transmission. And hence we see this dips. And the periodicity or the regular intervals at which it happens is known as the free spectral range, or FSR. So for spontaneous four-wave mixing, which is mainly done in quantum domain, as we saw, they launch in pump power, and signal and Idler are generated in the other two other two resonances. So if the pump is launched in the mth resonance, in the other resonances, signal and Idler are generated. But in our talk, we will focus on stimulated four-wave mixing, and where we'll actually launch in signal along with the pump power. And we'll see the generation of the Idler happening after the ring resonator. So next thing which comes to our mind when we talk about ring resonators and high power is bistability. So bistability is a very big problem for silicon ring resonators, which has been studied since 2004 and all. And people have tried to see that when you launch in very high power into the ring resonator, the transmission gets shifted, as well as you can see the shape of the transmission spectrum also changes. So this is the same image of a ring resonator, which is reported in this paper. It's by a group from by Michel Lipson's group, basically. So they have used waveguide cross section of 450 nanometer cross 250 nanometer, and the ring radius is 5 micron. So this clearly shows it's a very small footprint of the device that they have used. Some background noise is coming from somewhere.
It's okay, you continue, please.
So if we see here, this resonance, as we go on increasing the input pump power, the resonance shifts towards the right, which is mainly because of the thermo-optic effect. And also, we'll discuss that thermo-optic effect later. And also, we see the shape also changes. And if we try to see what happens to the output power at a particular point, so they have used a probe laser, and they have tried to observe the hysteresis or the bistability. So they have used a probe laser and fixed it at some wavelength to the right side of one of the resonances, and they have kept on increasing the input power. So as you go on increasing the input power, the output power also increases. But we know as the input power increases, the resonance also will shift towards right. So at a value of a particular input power, this resonance matches with this probe laser, and we can see the transmission drops. So basically, the probe laser is now seeing the resonance. Further you go on increasing the input power, it again rises. Now in the reverse path, when you're reducing the input power and trying to align the probe with the resonance, you can see the resonance matching with the probe happens at some other value of the input power. And hence we can observe it here. This matching is happening at other value. Hence we can see a clear hysteresis loop which is there, and we can say that bistability is present, because at say any value of input power you have two different solutions. So the takeaway message from here is it's very difficult to have fixed wavelength operation when you have different high input power. Next, very recently a group tried to show that they tried to actually lock the resonance so that the bistability they can control. So they have used a silicon micro ring resonator, and as they have tried to do spontaneous four-wave mixing, so that they'll try to generate photon pairs. But what they have done is they have used a temperature controller. So they have kept the silicon chip on temperature controller. These are the micro-ring responses of their devices. Interesting thing here is they have shown when you heat the device, the complete silicon chip, and you try to see the photon pair generation, it is very low compared to if you cool and do that. At the same time, if you look at the transmission, the extinction is pretty high or comparatively higher than the time if you are heating the sample. So the take home message is if you cool the device and try to lock the resonance, it will give you better efficiency. But they have not done any theoretical explanation or no theoretical model is presented. And the other thing is they're completely heating the sample. So which means when you change the temperature, the other devices on the sample gets affected. So this gives us the motivation, or rather we can have the objective now actually to, instead of completely heating or cooling the sample, we can do it for the individual ring resonators so that other devices are not affected. So we'll investigate we'll investigate this optical bistability and try to electrically control it. So for that, we'll have a detailed study in the origin of bistability, as I had mentioned in the beginning, the theoretical models, and then the device fabrication, followed by the experimental results. So to start with, we'll just see the different kind of, when nonlinearity is there, what are the different effects that come into picture in silicon. So we saw in the beginning that chi2 is 0. Most of the nonlinearity comes from chi3. So what happens is when you have high power, now the refractive index also becomes a function of the intensity. So n is the refractive index. It can be expressed now as n0 plus n2i, where n2 is the Kerr coefficient. Other thing which comes into picture is the two photon absorption. So we know silicon has a band gap of 1.1 electron volt, and when you have high power, so you have a lot of photons coming in, and our region of, our wavelength of interest is 1550 nanometer. So there, if you see what is the energy of each of the photons, it is around 0.8 electron volt. So together, if two photons are coming, like if you consider the energy of two photons, they are quite enough. Enough to raise one electron from the valence band to the conduction band. So moment this happens, there are a lot of carriers that is generated. So the change in the electron and hole concentration that happens actually can contribute to the change in the refractive index. And the imaginary part of the refractive index is actually contributes to the loss or delta alpha. We'll see the details, like due to this now what are the different processes that happens. So as I mentioned, we already have TPA as well as the Kerr nonlinearity. Because of TPA now, free carriers are generated. These free carriers can either be dissipated, so they can be absorbed, like they will have free carrier absorption. There can be free carrier dispersion, and when non-stop you have this pump coming in. So as silicon is an indirect bandgap semiconductor, the recombination will be in the indirect path, and that will give rise to a lot of heat. This heat will next be translated as thermo-optic phase modulate. Thermo-optic modulation. So if you consider these three things, they give rise to the delta n change, that is the refractive index change, and the imaginary part, which is the loss, is basically contributed from the two absorptions, that is the TPA and the FCA. So this is the loss term, and this will give rise to the phase term. So we'll see now this total loss and the total phase can be expressed in decomposed into linear and nonlinear terms. So as we already saw the nonlinear contributions, who is contributing to what. So for the loss, it is the TPA and the FCA, and the linear loss is the propagation loss. Now for the phase, the linear phase is like the 2 pi by lambda n effective L, which is our normal phase. And the nonlinear phase we saw is contribution comes from the self-phase modulation, the free carrier dispersion, and the thermal phase modulation. Now, this nonlinear loss and the nonlinear phase both can be modeled as a function of the power that goes into the microring resonator. P naught is the power that goes into the cavity. So if we try to understand here the contribution of both these factors basically. So we have tried to model it in this fashion, where beta is the two photon absorption coefficient, as we have seen here. A effective is the effective area of the optical mode which takes part in the nonlinear interaction, and L into this total term is basically the L effective, that is the total length at which the nonlinear interaction takes place. The other contribution is from FCA. So FCA is a thing which is happening because of TPM. So there the energy of two photons come into picture, and then the free carrier absorption coefficient and the time for the free carrier uh, lifetime. So similar, and other two parts are as usual, the L effective and A effective. Similarly, the nonlinear phase also can be modeled as a quadratic function of the field that is in the microring resonator. There, let us see how we can we can consider all these points. So first is N2, that is the Kerr nonlinearity or the self-phase modulation. That comes into picture, and these are again the same L effective and A effective terms. The other part, the nonlinear or the something that contributes to the P naught square, is basically the other two quantities. One is thermal phase modulation and other is the free carrier dispersion. So N2 dash corresponds to the thermal phase modulation. So TH is the thermal relaxation time. That is the time with which the heat dissipates after these carriers are relaxed. And N2 double dash contribution comes from the free carrier dispersion. So considering all this, now we will see when we apply all this in a microring resonator, how it will look like. So basics, we'll just discuss the basic boundary conditions. One is we can assume that this directional coupler region is lossless. So T square plus K square is equals to 1. Next, we'll see what is the field at Z equals to 0. That is just a coupling, where the coupling is happening. So the field at Z equals to 0, we term it as A naught. So the contribution of A naught, let us try to understand. So P in comes, and whatever is cross coupled into it will contribute to A naught. So root over of P in into the cross coupling coefficient. Minus J comes from the phase change of pi by 2 that happens from this waveguide to that waveguide. The other thing is when you have this non-stop round trip going on, so the self-coupling coefficient of that waveguide itself, as well as the phase that is there in the round trip and the loss that is there in the round trip, comes into picture. Similarly, if you want to understand what is the amount of light that is coupling out, we can again correlate as a cross coupling from A naught, this A naught, whatever comes from here. So that will have a K with it. And as because the phase change, we have minus J. And the A naught will have this round trip loss and phase added to it. And from the P it is just the through coupling, whichever is coming. So these are just the steady state boundary conditions, and these are nonlinear equations. And if we have to solve them, we have to plug in the value of phi RT and alpha RT. If you remember, in my previous slide, I have shown that phi RT and alpha RT are quadratic equations of P naught. So which shows that A naught and P out, or rather the field that will come out, will have two values. So that gives rise to the bistable solutions. Next, our point here is, till now we had two kinds of phases, that is the linear phase as well as the non-linear phase. Linear is our normal ring resonator phase, which is 2 pi by lambda n effective into L. The non-linear phase is because when you're pumping in high power, because of that the wavelength shifts and the different kind of non-linear processes, we get the non-linear phase. Our idea is to integrate an external phase shifter, which we call as phi A. So now using this phi A, so basically phi applied or something like that you can call it. So this phi A we will apply, and we'll try to adjust this phi NL so that we need not, so for a fixed wavelength operation, as I had mentioned in the beginning, that for high power fixed wavelength operation is a problem. So we'll try to adjust that using the phi A. So our total phase components now can be written as the phi naught, the original linear phase, the non-linear phase, and the extra phi applied that we are giving. And to make the phase matching hold, so they should be equal to 2m pi. And as I already mentioned, this solution we can get. So not only the phi RT and alpha RT, it also depends on the device geometry as well as what kind of phase shifter that we are using here. So in that case, we'll just discuss the different kinds of phase shifters that we can integrate with the microring resonator. There are basically two types. One is the electro-optic phase shifter and the other is the thermo-optic phase shifter. The electro-optic, as I had shown the PIN diode integrated waveguide in my introduction slide, similar thing can be used, or else we can use PN diode. In PN diode, what happens? The depletion region actually lies in the rib waveguide. And for the PIN, the intrinsic region is the rib waveguide. The change in the electron and hole concentration actually gives change in the refractive index. As mentioned previously also, the real part of the refractive index is delta n and the imaginary part is delta alpha. The other part, that is the thermo-optic part, which we'll discuss in our this talk. So the PN and PIN diode part we have discussed in our PhD seminar 1, and here we will focus mainly on the thermo-optic phase shifter part. So thermo-optic phase shifter, as the name suggests, will have to integrate a microheater. So the microheater can be integrated around the microring resonator, and there are different ways. In literature, people mostly use a top thick oxide, and on top of that, they try to deposit a metal film, which will be used as a heater. But in our work, we'll focus on slab integrated microheaters, which means it will be integrated in the slab. So if it is a doped heater, the doping will be done in the slab, which acts as a resistor, and then we can heat it and rise the temperature, and we can see the rise in the temperature in the rib waveguide also. The other thing is a metal microheater, where we'll deposit a strip of metal on top of the slab. So both the cases, when you apply bias, the temperature rises, and the change in the waveguide temperature code is actually affecting our N effective, or the delta N. So that takes into consideration the thermoptic coefficient of silicon, which is 1.8 into 10 power minus 4 for 1550 at 300 Kelvin. The interesting part here is the loss is negligibly zero. There is no extra loss which comes into picture when you integrate a thermo-optic phase shifter. So using this, we went ahead to design our device. So the device that we have designed and used in our study. So everything has been done on 220 nanometer SOI. So the device layer is 220, the box is 2 micron, and the handle layer is 700 micron. The rib waveguide width we have used is 420 nanometer, and the slab height we have used 150. So there is a slight etching so that we have a sufficient amount of slab on which we can deposit the metal heater. The ring resonator looks like this. So it's called a racetrack resonator because we have a straight section here. In the directional coupler, we have 5 micron length, and the ring radius is 50 micron, and the directional coupler gap is 150 nanometer, so that we have sufficient amount of coupling from the ring, from the bus to the ring. The waveguide loss that we have considered here is around 5 dB per centimeter. This is the typical waveguide loss that we have observed in most of our devices. So with this, if you see the simulation characteristics of the transmission spectrum, around 1550 nanometer, we can see this happening. And if you note the spectral FSR, that is the periodicity at which the resonance repeats, is around 2 nanometers. So this is a very big table, and I don't really want you to remember everything from here. I'll just tell you what are the things we need to remember for the further amount of further things that I'll discuss. So these are just the ring perimeter and the loss and coupling coefficient, etc. Mostly some are the like loss values and all is calculated from the day-to-day devices that we fabricate, and these are from simulation in numerical. We use numerical mode to simulate this, and we could get the N effective, A effective, and all that. And thermoptic coefficients and stuff are basically the standard values like TPA coefficient and all. Main thing we want, I'll want all of you to remember, is the thermal relaxation time, which we have used for our simulation, is 1 microsecond. And others are also like either from literature or they are standard values. So we'll see where this 1 microsecond comes into picture later in our slides. So we went ahead to see simulate and model our device to see the optical bistability. So similarly, as people had reported, when you go on increasing the input power, you observe a hysteresis loop like this. So for us, for our simulation, what we did, we also fixed it at 1 wavelength, and we went on increasing the input power. And as we know that the resonance shifts towards the right, we could also see this hysteresis loop coming into picture as you increase the input and decrease the input. Next is, now you fix the input power to a value where there is bistability happening. So we have say chosen 5 milliwatt to experimentally show this. Sorry, 8 milliwatt. So if you see here, now we have fixed the input power. At the same time, we have fixed the wavelength. What we'll do is, so the scenario looks something like this. And now we will apply phase from the external phase shifter that we have integrated, and we'll try to shift this resonance and match it with the wavelength. So if you notice here, the transmission looks like this. All the solid lines are basically when you increase the phi from the phase shifter. You can observe the transmission goes, and at a certain value of phi, when they match, you have a dip in the transmission, and then further it goes away. Similarly, in the reverse path, we can observe that matching of the resonance and the fixed wavelength happens at some other value of phi, that is a phi applied, and then you have coming back again to the high transmission. Interestingly, the extinction is much high in the reverse path. Other thing we studied is field enhancement. So I had mentioned that P naught. P naught is the amount of power that is coupled inside the microring resonator. So if you see here, the field enhancement actually can be expressed as whatever amount of light you are sending into it and whatever is stored in the cavity. So P naught by P in actually gives us the value of field enhancement. If you notice, similarly in the forward path, the field enhancement increases at that value of phi A, that is the applied phase, where it is exactly matching with the resonance, and then again it reduces. But in the reverse path, if you observe, the field enhancement is much higher compared to the one in the forward path. So this is a very interesting thing which we could actually show in our experiments also. We'll see that. So before that, we'll see for if you have different power. So if you want to launch in different kind of power, what is the scenario? So if you have like still 1 milliwatt, we could not see as such any hysteresis or bistability. So the onward and the backward path all happened at around 0.2 pi. As we slowly increase the power, we could see the gap coming in, that is the hysteresis loop is coming into picture, and as you increase it more, it widens. Interestingly, if you see here, phi a of up arrow means in the forward path, when you're increasing the phi a, most of them happen in the same value of phi a. Only in the backward path we could see that it is changing. Same thing if you notice for the field enhancement, they also happen at the same value of phi a, and in the backward path it is higher. If you observe closely, the value of of the field enhancement is much higher for a lower input power, but it has reduced as the input power is increasing. So if you remember our equations for the loss factor, the alpha NL which we had tried to express, there also P naught is there. It is, I mean, so P naught is basically dependent on alpha NL. So the nonlinearity losses also come into picture, and hence with the increase in the P in, you can see there is a reduction in the field enhancement happening. The reduction in the field enhancement is more in the forward, that is the increasing phi A, and it is much less when we are trying to reduce and bring it. Similarly, here, as I mentioned, that phi operating point when you are increasing it is nearly constant, which is also visible, and phi operating point in the reverse path actually changes. We can observe it here also. So using this, we went ahead. So this is basically the theoretical study simulation that we have done and the model we wanted to propose. Using this, we went ahead with our fabrication. So before that, just a quick revision of the device design that we had done. So it is again on 220 nanometer, and this is the device dimension which we have chosen. If you clearly see, it lies in the single mode region. So our waveguides basically support only one mode, and that is a TE mode. If you see, 420 nanometer is the RIB waveguide, and the slab height is 150 nanometer. So this is somewhere here, which is showing it is a clear TE0 area. So this is the electrical field distribution of the geometry. And if you see here, let us try to notice here how far is the field extending. So this is 0. 0 is the exact middle point of the RIB waveguide. And we can see the field is extending not much beyond 1 micron. So considering this, we have decided to integrate our heater 2 micron away to be on a safer side, so that we don't have any excess loss because of this metal heater. So the heater is placed 2 micron away, and we have used titanium as the metal of our choice for this fabrication. And we have used 50 micron ring radius and 5 micron LDC as we had designed. So this is the simulation showing the heat profile which we did in COMSOL. This is just around, if you take a slice along this, so this is just the cross section where you can see this is the micro heater and this is the RIB waveguide. So if you go on increasing the power here, the heat does transfer there. So they are optically not connected because we don't want any loss in the optical mode, but they are the heat profile actually is getting distributed till the waveguide. So this is when you integrate with a ring resonator, and you can see the 3D simulation to see this profile. So you can see here the heater that we have used encompasses half of it. So we'll see in the further slides what are the different things we have done with the heat. And this is just the top view of the same showing. So in our final device, we had 3 different length of heaters. So one which is encompassing just 1/4 of the ring resonator. The second one which encompasses 2/4 and we name it D2. The one which was 1/4 is D1. And the other which encompasses 3/4, we name it as D3. So taking all this in mind, we have fabricated the device. So we have used electron beam lithography for our fabrication, because if you notice, all the device dimensions were like 420 nanometer and 150 nanometer is the DC gap. So all these are very crucial, and hence we have done the fabrication using electron beam lithography. In the first step, we had patterned the waveguides as well as the grating couplers and etched it using dry etching in ICP-RI. So as I had mentioned, we had etched very small, around 70 nanometer, so that you have a sufficient amount of slab to integrate the heater. At the same time, the 70 nanometer etching is very useful for the grating couplers also. It's a very optimized design for the grating coupler to have maximum operation around 1550 nanometer wavelength. Second mask we used is to deposit the aluminum contact pads. So we patterned for the aluminum contact pads, and then did thermal evaporation of aluminum, and finally we did lift off. And the final mask was for the titanium metal heaters. So here again, we used electron beam lithography to pattern the micro heaters, and we used E-beam lithography for this case, E-beam evaporation for this case to evaporate titanium. So that helps us to give us a much precise control on the thickness of titanium that we are depositing. So as I had mentioned previously, we have used 100 nanometer thickness of titanium for our study. So this shows some of the microscopic images. So this was just the patterning of aluminum contact pads was done, and this is after the liftoff. And here you can see the patterning of the micro heaters, and this is the titanium after which, after the liftoff of titanium. And these 3 images shows the fabricated devices of the 3 different length of micro heaters. To have a close look, we also took SEM images. These are the SEM images of the 3 different length of micro heaters integrated with the micro ring resonator. This is the grating coupler region, and this is the zoomed in image of this region, that is our directional coupler. We could achieve a 150 nanometer gap between both the waveguides, and the waveguide widths were 420 nanometer. If you zoom into this region, that is the micro ring waveguide along with the heater, we could see we had designed for a gap of 2 micron, but there was slight misalignment after all the 3 masks. But 2.2 micron is good enough for us to carry on with our experimental studies. So for our experimental studies, we have used this setup. This is just a block diagram of the setup that we have used. The optical spectrum analyzer which we use has an inbuilt laser source, which is a very low power laser, and we use that to feed into the input grating coupler of the devices, and the output is collected and is fed back into the OSA to see the spectrum. And for the micro heaters, we have used a source meter unit which is connected in series with the function generator, and electrical probes are used to pass the current. And for the transient measurements, we have used a photodiode and finally seen the measurements in the DSO. And this is a image of our experimental setup. If you closely notice here, you can see the fiber which is coming at 10-degree angles, and the thicker ones are the electrical probes. So all this lands on top of the surface, of the sample. So next we start with the device characterization. First is the passive characterization. That is when we don't use the micro heaters, only the ring resonators as fabricated. So same characterization setup we have used with the TLS and the OSA. This shows the red curve shows the spectrum of the reference waveguide or the straight waveguide. And this black curves are the ring resonances that we have obtained. If you notice, the launched in power is minus 5.6 dB. As I mentioned, this is a very low power laser. So it was just minus 5.6 dB that we had launched, and around 1550. And around that, the waveguide here shows a maximum transmission of minus 19 dB. So we could go back and calculate what is our grating coupler loss. So per facet, we got a loss of around 6.5 dB. Next thing is we wanted to find out what is the exact spacing between two resonances. We could see like we had designed around 2 nanometer and it was nearly same. For the wavelength range of 1520 to 1580, we could see the FSR was varying from 1.9 to around 2.1 nanometer. From the FSR, we can actually calculate what is the group index. So that also we, according to the simulation, it was 3.72 and we could get something 3.78. Next is what is the quality factor for each of these resonances? That can be actually calculated by each of the value of the resonance wavelengths divided by the 3 dB bandwidth, that is full width at the half maximum. Using this, we could calculate experimental values of the Q factor of the ring. Around 1550, it is somewhere around 45,000 is the value of the Q factor. Now, the Q factor, which is theoretically actually can be expressed using this term. So if you see here, you have the through coupling coefficient T and the alpha, I mean A, that is the loss factor of the ring. So now at critical coupling, we say this A is equals to T. Critical coupling is where you have the maximum extinction. So at that point, when A is equals to T, it becomes a quadratic equation of A. So from this, we could actually derive the waveguide loss. For all the devices that we have fabricated, it was lying in between 4 to 5 dB per centimeter. The other thing which we extracted was the coupling coefficient so that we could actually know what is the value of P and K that is coming from the device. Next, we went for the active characterization. So that is when we are probing the microheater and applying bias. So if you see here, this is for the device D2. I have shown the results. So this black to black curve is 1 FSR. And as you go on increasing the bias voltage into the microheater, you can see the resonance is shifting towards right, which is because of the thermoptic effect. For the other two devices also, we could calculate by applying the bias and we could see the rise in the, the shift in the delta lambda, the resonance wavelength shift because of the applied bias. So a smaller device has lesser length, smaller microheater has lesser length and hence the resistance is low. And so what we wanted is we wanted to restrict the amount of current that we are giving into the device so that it is prevented from burning. That's why we have like different power values for the 3 different length of devices. From the IV characteristics, we could actually extract the resistance of each of the heaters and they were nearly okay, like they do follow a relationship. And for the transient measurement, we have supplied a square wave from the function generator on top of a small DC bias, and we could see what is the output coming in the DSO. And it shows a rise time and fall time were nearly around 3 microseconds. So these are the value that we have tabulated, like the total experimental extracted values from the experiment, and they are very much within the range. There's not much deviation from what we had designed and the one that we have fabricated. Next is the nonlinear part. So till now it was the discussion about the normal phase tuning, or rather the linear phase tuning. Now we will come into the picture where we will see how we are getting the non-linear phase. So this is the curve we just now discussed. If you try to again plot this and decide and find out what is the amount of phi applied phi A we are doing, we could actually use this relationship, and we actually found out what is the phi applied. So for each bias voltage, what is the amount of phi A that we are just relationship between the bias voltage to phi A. Next is when you have high input power. So all this till now we were just using the TLS, which was with the OSA. So that was a low power laser. Now for high input power, we have used an erbium doped fiber amplifier. So this has helped us to amplify our input laser signal, and we could see the resonance characteristics shifting as we had seen previously in literature, as well as we could see the shift, the shape also changes. So from here, now this, what is the change in this wavelength for each of this P in, we could also find out what is phi NL. So we now have an idea what is the nonlinear phase that is coming into picture for a particular amount of input power. Now I had told that we'll try to remember that 1 microsecond. So here it comes into picture. So we had done our simulation using 1 microsecond as the thermal relaxation time. So if you see the 1 microsecond value, if you consider, it really doesn't match well with the experimental data that we got. So this experimental data is nothing but this values of wavelength. So we tried to fit that. When we put 1.5 microsecond, we could see that they are nearly matching, at least like after 6 milliwatt. It is a very nice match with the simulation that we have done. So for our further to verify our experimental results, we have used the thermal relaxation time as 1.5 microsecond. So using this, we went ahead for our hysteresis and bistability study. So the setup that we have used is we have used the TLS with the inbuilt laser source, with the inbuilt laser source with the OSA. So that acts as a probe so that we can see the ring resonances. The pump laser, that is the high power which we want, has been added with the erbium doped fiber amplifier, and both of them are fed into a 50-50 fiber optic coupler. The output of this is fed into the input grating coupler of the MRR. And for the voltage source, we will be just tuning the voltage. First, what we have done, we have placed the pump laser at 215 picometer to the right of one of the resonance. Now, we will now notice what is the total transmission that is coming. So we'll note down the transmission as we go on increasing the voltage. So what will happen when we increase the voltage? As we go on increasing the voltage in the micro heater, this resonance will start shifting right according to a normal thermo-optic behavior. So as this resonance starts shifting right, we'll also try to observe what is the total transmission that is coming out. So if you notice, at a voltage of around 7.6 volts, there the pump wavelength actually matches with the resonance. So there is the dip that is observed. And as you further increase, it goes out of the resonance. Now in the reverse path, what do you observe? We observe that the way the pump wavelength is actually approaching the resonance is much slower, and it happens at some other value of voltage, that is say something around 5.3 we experimentally observed. At this value, we could get the maximum extinction also. So which means that the pump was well placed inside the resonance. So in this way, we could actually do that fixed wavelength operation as we were mentioning. The other thing we noted is the lambda r, that is the resonance wavelength. So there also, if you see in the forward path, the slope is much higher. The slope at which the lambda r changes is much higher compared to the reverse path. So in the reverse path, it is much slower, and hence fixing or parking your pump wavelength in the resonance is much comparatively easier, I would say, whenever you are using the reverse path of the voltage. Same thing, we just converted to phi, because all our simulations we are modeling we had done using phi. So bias voltage we have just changed to the applied phi, and we could see this. We could actually find out what is the value of phi applied operation for the lower as well as for the increased path. You try to see with the simulation result, the reverse path actually matches quite well, but in the forward path there is slight mismatch in the value. So actually, as I mentioned, in the forward path, it is very tough to align the pump wavelength with the resonance. So in the reverse path, it is much, much comfortable, I would say. So the final thing we wanted to show is the stimulated four-wave mixing, because in classical domain, if the efficiency that you get or the Idler that is generated in stimulated four-wave mixing actually relates to the amount of photon pairs that is generated in the spontaneous four-wave mixing in the quantum domain. So here for the stimulated four-wave mixing, the similar experimental setup was used, except we didn't use that very low laser that we have been using all throughout. Now we are using a slightly high power laser, which will act as our signal, because here we will launch in both the signal and the pump, and we'll see the generation of the Idler. And the other part of the circuit was the same. So for this experiment, so this is the hysteresis curve that we have obtained. So for this, the in-pump power was 8 milliwatt, and the signal power that we are launching is 200 microwatt. So using this, if you do the four-wave mixing at this voltage, that is now when you're increasing the voltage and trying to match the pump with the resonance, and once it is matched, we could do the four-wave mixing process. We saw the generation of the Idler as well as the conjugate Idler. Next, so this four-wave mixing was done at point A. Next, while we were reducing the voltage and trying to bring back, we could again get it around 5.3 volts. And we saw the generation of idler is much more enhanced, and also the conjugate idler, than the four-wave mixing that we have done in point A. If you notice, it's like around 11.5 PV increment in the idler that has happened when we have reduced the voltage and aligned it. So finally, we just plotted the conversion efficiency. Conversion efficiency is how much amount of idler that is generated for the signal that you're launching in. So for different value of the pump power, we have plotted. So all the symbols are our experimental data, and the solid line is a modeling value that we have used. And this is for the reverse path of the 5, and in the forward path we could see the experimental results are not matching exactly with whatever simulation or our model shows. There is deviation. So as I mentioned, the forward path is really challenging to place or align your laser with it. Hence, we come to the conclusion of this talk. So to summarize from beginning, what we have seen, we have studied in detail the theory behind optical bistability, especially taking into consideration the different effects, the Kerr effect, TP, FC, FCT, and thermal phase modulation. After that, we have tried to model the bistability using the phase tuner, and we could obtain the field enhancement is much higher when the phase is reduced and the resonance is aligned with the pump. Then we fabricated our device, which is like 50 micron ring radius, was fabricated on a 220 nanometer SOI. The Q factor achieved was around 45,000, and we integrated with the titanium microheater, which shows a tunability of around 45 picometer per milliwatt, and response time we measured was 3 microseconds. And finally, we showed the stimulated four-wave mixing, and we could obtain the hysteresis loop, which we could control with the phase controller. And next, the idler generation was much enhanced with the pump power, as we observed. Future scope of work is there is a lot which can be improved actually. The microring resonators can be designed. We have not taken consideration about the dispersion and stuff, so that can be taken into consideration so that the microring resonator becomes much effective device for the nonlinear interaction. Other kind of microheater that I was mentioning, so the doped heater, that also can be used. Normally, a doped heater gives much better tunability, so that also can be used, and we can start improve the figure of merits. Interestingly, this can be used as an optical memory. So I will just give a brief understanding. We are now very familiar with this hysteresis curve now. So if you see here, you're pointing your laser here. So this is in the resonance, and you are at a very low transmission. So this is basically this point. Now, if you give a slight little negative voltage, that is, so this dotted line is the applied voltage. You give a slight little, it can be less than this. You just give a less negative voltage. What happens? You can see the output has come high. So you are now in point B. Now, if you remove the negative voltage also, the output remains in point B. So this is the interesting part that I want to highlight here. So it actually acts as a memory, optical memory. So even when you're removing your negative pulse, the output stays here, unless and until you give a positive pulse and bring it down to C. So then if you give a positive pulse, it will come down to C. So there are some more studies which we are doing with this, some transient measurements and stuff, and that actually can be helpful to design an optical memory which can be controlled electrically. And this will find an application in FPPA circuits, which is a very hot topic now. So if you have programmable photonic circuits there, it will be really helpful. So finally, I would just go through the different publications that I had during this time. So this complete work we have reported in IEEE JST-QE, and a part of it was actually reported, the experimental results was actually reported in Clio Pacific Rim, which happened online this time. And the memory part, as I mentioned, so that manuscript is under preparation. And all the thermoptic part, that is the metal heater and the dope heater, all these are in these conferences. And previously done work during my PhD seminar 1, which deals with PN and PIN diodes, those were reported in these conferences. Finally, I would like to thank my PhD supervisor, Professor Vijay Krishna Das. So I just want to mention one thing I like about him. So if I ever want to just jump and go to any other step, and he never allowed me to do that. He made sure I learn everything, learn where I had gone wrong, and if any learning is deficit, he made sure that is filled, and then only I go to the next step. So he never left a vacuum, I would say. So that's the best part I like about him, and it's like helped me in all the different, like even in my low times he was there to cheer me up and motivate me. And I would obviously thank Professor Shayan Mukherjee. He's a Vajra faculty from UCST. He comes here for a month every year, and discussions with him are really helpful. We get a lot of deep insight about the work on silicon photonics. And yeah, and my DC members, Professor Karmalkar, Professor Dilip, and Professor Vasa. So I really had like time-to-time discussions, especially when I was stuck with the fabrication part in PN and PIN diodes. So I had some discussions with them, which was really helpful, and it helped me to figure out where we were going wrong. And faculty members of EE3 and EE5, because all my courses are related to E3 and EE5, and also fabrication related stuff I could discuss with many of the faculties of E3. And they really helped me like for many steps where I had gone wrong. And yeah, very important is the staff of MEMS lab, because without them I don't think fabrication work is possible, especially technicians and you know lab in charges, and the other, I mean, everyone I would like to name here basically, because they have been so close to me, especially Vani ma'am, because the way she goes on bombarding the vendors with her mails, otherwise we don't get things, stuffs in time. And Prakash sir, Rajendra sir, they're always there whenever you need. And Mariswaran, Venki, and Deva, they have mostly been for the lithography and etching and metallization. They were the ones, and diffusion in the beginning. They were the ones who were always there to help me. And yes, my friends of IOLab. So not only friends, I would say here it starts from like from generation one to the next generation. So Sujit has been, the best person to teach fabrication. His military trainings really helped us a lot. And then yes, in the process we had like I had really made a lot of good friends. Sumi, Ramesh, Meenachi Sundaram, Saket, they're like very close to me. And lately, I would mention Arnab, the next generation or the ongoing generation. He has helped me a lot, especially with this device characterization part. He was fully involved with it. And all my new here, the friends in 001 and 002, like, I mean, it's really a big group, I would say we were. And my funding agency is MHRD for sponsoring me giving me my stipend for 5 years, and DST has sponsored the PNPI and diode project part, and METI and NETRA for the last 2 years. I'm getting funding from this. And finally, my family members, their support and encouraging words has always been there all throughout. And lastly, I would like to thank Dr. Daiseku Ikeda. So he's a philosopher, and his philosophy has really kept me motivated during this 7 years of PhD. Thank you all. Thank you all for your time and patience.
Yeah. But I think Riddhi, you can answer a few questions also from the audience. So any question is there, we can just unmute yourself and directly ask question maybe. So I am asking students.
Can faculty ask question?
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Riddhi, on slide 25, you showed that the group velocity was increasing linearly with number, I think, with wavelength.
Group velocity, no, I mean,
Yeah,
the NG.
not FSR was increasing. Sorry, FSR was increasing linearly with wavelength. Can you explain why that happens?
So this we have not designed it to be non-dispersive. That's what, as I mentioned in the last slide, we still have scope for making the dispersion zero. So because of that, the FSR actually.
I see. Okay. I think on slide 30, I had another question. I don't remember what that was. Can you just go to slide 30? Yeah. So do you understand why the idler is so much higher than its conjugate?
Uh, so thing is, conjugate is generated only because you have high power. If it was, I mean, if you have more high power, there will be more generation which is happening, right?
No, I thought they both have to get generated together for matching, right? Otherwise, you would not
But
phase match.
yes,
That's what I
but
mean.
conjugate is not the one which we are like.
Yeah, but I
Going.
think Riddhi, what he's asking that the idler is 2 omega p minus omega s, and whereas conjugate is 2 omega s minus omega p. So in from that point of view, you should be able to answer that why conjugate is slightly lower power
Yeah, because
depending on power level. Yeah.
yes, signal power is much less compared to.
So the availability of photons basically that actually pump photon numbers are more. That is what it should be your answer.
Because it's closer to the pump,
Pump.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you also understand this overall shape of the baseline, why it is decreasing towards higher wavelengths?
Baseline, you mean the AC? I mean this one.
Yeah, what you're calling the AAC.
So towards the higher wavelengths, it's mostly I feel that it's because how a grating coupler is. So because if you notice, if you remember the grating coupler towards the higher wavelength, it is not very effective. I feel this is just a reflection of that.
I see. Okay. Last question. So your conversion efficiencies are at minus 24 dB, which is like 1% or less, right? Less than 1%, half a percent.
Mhm.
Is that correct? Did I get that
Yes,
correctly?
yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So
So
what do you expect as photon generation rate in the quantum regime when you are degenerate?
mm,
Because you mentioned something about that in passing, and I wasn't sure how to relate this to
yeah, I mean
photon
that.
pair generation.
Yes, so that again depends. Like for spontaneous forward mixing, mostly if you notice the conversion efficiency, there the pump to the power 6 comes into picture. So that relationship will give, but exact relationship which will I don't remember at this point the exact relationship which will give you the exact values of pair generated there in quantum
So I
computing.
can use I can use some version of this black curve
Hmm.
of conversion efficiency versus P in
Hmm.
to estimate what the spontaneous pair generation is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it will be related to this conversion efficiency, whatever
So
pair.
now question is from this knowledge that your conversion efficiency this much. So now I want to estimate what is the generation rate of spontaneous emission if there is no signal at all, only pump is there.
Mhm.
So there is a formula. I think one
Yeah,
paper was
that's what
there.
I was saying. So it is to the power of 6. The relationship, I mean, the value I remember is proportional to the power of 6 of the pump. So from there, we can get the idea of the conversion efficiency
Do
in
you know
quantum
what
computing.
is the generation rate reported so far?
Uh, no, I don't remember the
Yeah. So
values.
that has to be.
I mean, it's okay. If you hadn't said quantum, I would have not
So I just didn't go
woken
into
up.
quantum that much.
So
I mentioned that I'm in classical domain.
No,
yeah, you said quantum, so I woke up. I
In
mean,
the
if you hadn't said
beginning.
quantum, I would have continued to.
that is I
All
think
right.
Ornov's task.
Arnav
I
will
think.
carry forward that.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So any other question, Professor
So,
Karpalkar?
Riddhi, this is Dilip.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, I also had a question on this conversion efficiency, right? Can you compare this? Do you have any other numbers for other methods, right?
Uh,
Which gives this four-way mixing, right? Can you compare
yeah.
this efficiency with any other methods?
No,
Yeah, I mean, the literature you mean?
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Yes,
others
yes.
reported result.
Yeah, other
Uh,
reports reported.
I
Yeah.
don't have the slide here, but yes, they are around the same. Like so, for ring resonator, I remember. They have a conversion efficiency of around minus 22 dB. But that was the design was made very efficient, as in the dispersion free, for a pump power of around uh, to 1 or 2 milliwatt they could get. So that was a conversion efficiency of around 22 dB they have got. I mean, it's not our conversion efficiency, as I mentioned, if you use a dispersion-free device geometry, it will be enhanced. So
Riddhi,
it's not very.
other comparison would be to some of the experiments that DEPA students run using semiconductor optical amplifiers. They also do this four-way mixing.
Okay.
I do not know what efficiencies they get, but maybe you can find out what they typically are able to report, because those are also small silicon devices, right? So
I'll check with that. But the range is somewhere around -24 to -21.
But your results is not the best for sure.
No,
So
no,
that
not the
is
best. We are proposing the technique. That is what we want to highlight.
All right. The second question is regarding this titanium microheater design, right? So right now you have a titanium strip on the surface of the semiconductor, right? Did
Right.
you maybe on console or something? Did you try putting a trench and fill it with titanium and see whether it is better?
I have not done that trench. So you mean air?
No, right now it's on the surface of the silicon, right, or semiconductor, right? So what if
you
you
mean
create a
it has
trench?
a buried heat?
Yeah, buried.
No, that I have not done, but Ramesh had done some simulations for his study. So, but it was slightly better.
Okay.
Because I mean, less amount of slab you need to heat, right? So here, this slab also you will be heating, and then efficiency-wise, it will be slightly better.
Yeah. And the last one is you commented about that optical memory, right? So, where is the information? Information is encoded in the power, right? You have two different levels of power. That's what.
Yes. It is optical memory, so information will be in the optical domain. Only this.
But it's encoded in what property? Within the power or two levels of power?
It's an energy stored in the cavity.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be Riddhi, that should be your answer. So it is energy stored and it is released. That's a thing.
Right. Yeah, that's all. Good work and good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
So Professor Karmalkar, please.
Yeah. So they have asked many questions. I will just ask one question. Just the previous slide, please go back.
Conversion efficiency.
Oh, is it future at the end? At the end, you had shown some model and measured data, right? And the differences. Just go back.
This one.
Yeah. So let us say I'm not able to. So the
full screen.
The bottom medium one, conversion efficiency, right? So can what are the reasons because of the difference between the measured data and your calculation?
Forward path. So if you see this, the ring transfer function, or I would better show you from the other graph, it will be easy to understand. Here, if you see, so the ring transfer function actually changes a lot the shape when you have high power. So because of this itself, it is actually very tough to align the pump with this resonance when you are approaching from this side. Okay, so basically in the forward path means this resonance is moving towards the right and it is trying to catch the lambda p. So that part, because of the difference in the slope in our transmission spectrum, it really, the cavity effect basically plays a role, and hence it doesn't allow us to place it exactly in the resonance, which is much better if you are doing from the other way where you have a slower slope. So that's why we could not place it like this. Is not like one time we had tried. So this were like repeated measurements we had tried, but forward path we could not get much better, efficiency.
Okay. So is it possible to improve your model and then, the measured data?
Model, I don't think that, because our idea is like whatever values we have considered in our model. I mean, in the model, finally, we have plugged in the devices, the experimental device parameters, and then we have tried to match. If you see this, so here we have actually plugged in the values which we have got from experiment, and then the basic values like the tau c and tau h, the lifetimes of failure and the heat. That only we have just.
No, Riddhi, what I think Professor Karmalkar is asking that when you are forward path, your model and your experimental result is not matching that part, you can somehow improve. So I think that's the problem with your experiment. You cannot control very perfectly your wavelength,
Correct.
get an exact result, because that is very unstable.
Or
That,
no, one more thing we can do here. Yes, I got the question. I can answer it. So one more thing we can do is say the voltage step that we have used in increasing in our experiment, that can be further controlled if you get a much better SMU. The the
Okay.
voltage step at which here, that if some more preciseness if we have, then we can again slightly increase at least. That's what I
Yeah.
see.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Good presentation.
so now, Professor DJ, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was good work, and she handled all the questions very well. My only question is, 7 years. I mean, were you a full-time student, Riddhi, or did you go
Yes.
part-time and
No,
working somewhere?
no, I was a full-time student,
Okay,
and
okay.
but I
But
would say 1 year I can actually like it goes into the downtime of a machine.
that's
So
okay. No, no. My question
that
is,
was
did you get paid for all the 7 years,
yes,
or?
yes.
Oh.
I have been paid from an Netra project. And,
Okay, okay. Excellent, excellent. Okay, very good. Very
Yeah, she was paid, and also she has contributed a lot of work for the project also
good.
during
Good,
her time.
good, good. Excellent.
Okay, fine. I think we can have some quickly short DC meeting. I think Professor DJ Karmalkar Dilip is there, and others can you just please leave the room, and then we can just shortly discuss. Then we can ask about synopsis and submission of thesis, all those type of things.
I have to connect a charger. Okay.
Yeah,
Couple of
please.
minutes. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so I think almost everyone. So Jyoti Prakash is there. Okay, Prakash is fine then. Okay, so yeah, as Professor DJ says that already 7 years. Now, when you can
Graduate.
graduate?
Yeah. Well, probably it's 7+ now, because we're already.
Yeah. 7+. I think August joined.
Yeah.
July 15th.
July 15th.
Okay.
So.
Are you close to finishing now? Because you already have papers and so many conference papers and so on.
Yes.
Okay.
So the second paper we are writing,
Okay.
and parallelly I have written a part of the thesis. Just I have to modify.
Most critical part, you should mention that you are going to join in job in 28th of this month.
Oh, okay. So you will go. But my only.
But I still have 3 weeks. I think.
Okay.
I'll push.
Riddhi, where are you joining?
I'm joining in Global Foundries Bangalore.
Global Foundry in Bangalore or in Singapore?
Yes,
or where?
Bangalore.
Bangalore.
The Singapore offer I have turned down from Micron.
Okay.
Because it's very tough now to relocate and stuff. So, and this is a much better profile, because this job profile is completely silicon photonics engineer. So more apt.
My other fear is people who have gone on RKA, right, have taken much more time than what they would have done had they been here. Okay, how close are you to completing? I think you should try to submit the thesis and go.
Yes. That's what even I want to do, because I don't want to delay it anymore. Plan is like that second paper, some simulations are left, which will obviously go to my thesis. So that parallelly I'm working, as well as thesis partly I have written. So I just want to finish it as much in this next 3 weeks. And other thing is I will be in Chennai only, because now it is not that I have to relocate to Bangalore. So if any work needed, I can go to lab on the weekends also.
Doesn't happen.
But I am in Chennai, so it's just 500.
I know. I can tell you example of a MS person who was right behind IIT, working, on OMR. What would have taken 2 months and would have taken 2 years. Okay.
No, I don't want
So,
to do that.
yeah. So,
when you will be able to you will be ready with your draft thesis. So because in the report you have to write when you are you will be appearing for synopsis and then submission of thesis. That date we have to write today's document report actually.
Mhm.
So when your draft will be ready so that you can go for synopsis, tentative date. Paper can go parallelly while writing your thesis, maybe within a month or so that can be done. Apart from that, draft should be ready and you should have synopsis, and within a month you have to submit your thesis. So that
The present condition, I can finish my thesis in 3 to 4 weeks, because at present I don't have any other lab.
so you have already initiated a thesis writing something also.
Correct, yes. I have partly written most of the chapters. Now I need to fine tune.
So by 15th of October, you can have your synopsis.
Yes.
Around 15th of October. So you have just 1 month, 1 week.
Correct. That should be fine.
Reddy, did you already ask for an extension of joining or something like that? They would have given you, right?
I asked them, but they were saying that don't delay it much, because most of the people who have delayed this thing has gone on hold. So
All right. Okay.
that's
Okay.
it. And Venkat is my manager, so it was.
Oh,
will be my
Venkat means
Okay.
Dilip's PhD student, no? That.
And Anjan.
Sorry, Anjan. Sorry, yeah.
So he only said that don't delay it. He told that I can. They don't need a thesis submission, but
Yeah.
finish off as fast.
Okay. So, Professor Karmalkar, you have something to add here?
No, nothing. I don't have anything to add. I think whatever they have said, except that I will just reinforce that notion that once you take up a job, okay, so if you have done a lot of work, see, this only people who are senior and who have seen many students undergo this phase know about it. As soon as you get a job, your new problems will start and they will be more exciting to you than what you have done, even if it is 7 years. Okay. So this is the way, this you have to simply accept from people who have gone through it. It is something like people are telling what will happen after marriage. Person cannot tell before marriage. Person who is getting married doesn't know it. People who have gone through it only know it. Right? So I think that is a very good advice. As far as possible, that is what I tell my students also, that, writing thesis after joining a job, it's just very difficult.
Yes. I agree that. And that's what, I already have planned for the next 3 weeks how I will try to finish. That is my priority.
Yeah.
We can keep the synopsis in mid of October, as I mentioned. So.
Okay. I think we'll record that.
Yeah. I'm already recording everything here.
No, I know everything is being recorded. Yeah, I see the red button on.
Yeah.
So, Bijoy, I have to leave because I have another meeting. Okay.
Yeah, I think we are done almost. Anything else? I think we will circulate the report. Maybe
We'll also leave. Yes.
Thing,
I'll also leave. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Riddhi. It's a good talk.
Thank you.
Bye.